Honestly, back in my 20s, I think that if I knew that one day I would finally get there, that I don't know, I'd like to say that I would have not had those periods where I quit writing, those periods of feeling defeated and giving up. But I say it all the time, writers have to write. And if you keep writing in everything that you do, eventually something is going to come from it.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. So, the oldest advice in writing is write what you know. But what happens when what you know involves crawling through dusty attics, engaging in bidding wars with senior citizens, and building a business around fabrics that most people would see as cleaning rags? Well, you get Kira Hartley-Klinger, and you get one amazing book. On today's podcast, we're here to prove that expertise comes in all forms, and the most compelling stories often emerge from the most unexpected places. We're going to be exploring what happens when customer feedback becomes career direction, when Etsy product descriptions evolve into published literature, and when a $3 fabric scrap accidentally launches a relationship with Hollywood. Our guest today didn't just follow the traditional path to authorship. While other writers were crafting fictional worlds, Kira was living in one, a world where estate sales became battlegrounds, where competitors earn nicknames like characters in a novel, and where every purchase comes with enough drama to fill a book, literally. So, without any further ado, Kira, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very nicely done. That was a great introduction. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad. Well, I think it's the best way to frame what we're going to be talking about today. The spunk and pizzazz behind everything you do, and just your personality, the way it shines through like that. So I'm really excited to dive in. It's going to be a great show. Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, of course. Well, before we talk about your book, though, I think it's important for us to touch a little bit about your background and what you do. And I gave a bit of a, background in that introduction, but I think there's always more to be filled in those gaps. So you do describe yourself as somebody who's been crawling through dusty attics and basements on 50-plus-year-old knees. So what drew you to estate sales and vintage fabric hunting?
The fabric was accidental. I raised 3 children a long time ago. I became a mom very young, and I was always looking for work that I could do where I could still be a stay-at-home mom, or that I could work while they were in school once they went to school. As they got older, one of the things that I landed on was buying and selling. eBay was pretty new. It was only about 5 years old. And I started to go to auctions and estates and buying things that nobody else wanted to see whether or not they were worth any money. And I got lucky often enough that I really started to pursue it. At one point, one of the things that I bought that nobody wanted was fabric. And, there were a lot of boxes in the backyard of an estate, and people just really weren't that enthusiastic about it. Auctioneers are very rarely enthusiastic about fabric. It's always like the last thing to be sold. So yeah, I bought fabric. And this was, I started buying and selling 20 years ago. I probably started dabbling in fabric maybe 15 years ago. I had to learn about it. I didn't know a lot about it. And so yeah, I started to do research. I started to follow trends. I started to learn about fiber content and how to date fabric. And it was a stepping stone process, little by little by little. And I started to grow a following on eBay, but they don't really have the right audience on eBay for it, in my opinion. And so I was combining fabric with everything else that I was selling, and it wasn't really getting enough attention. So I decided to move it to Etsy and just have a fabric shop. And it also became a textile shop. And I also salvage textiles like old quilts and old blankets and anything that is made of fibers that can be broken down and repurposed and made into something else. I really try hard not to throw anything out. And so I have a huge following that comes for those bits and pieces of scraps too. But yeah, so I started my Etsy shop and I started writing the stories about the acquisitions, where they came from, the competition, the auctioneers, just things that were fresh on my brain as I'm listing this fabric. It's like, it's so juicy, it's so good, I have to tell somebody. So, my husband's sick of the story, so I'm going to write it down here. And
Right.
yeah, people started to write in about the stories, and that kind of took off from there.
That's so cool that the way it all fell into place like that. I could just picture the way that, you were just following your passion, and then writing it down, and then eventually, boom, lo and behold, we have Fabric Wars, the tales of the hunt for vintage fabric. So, really cool that you're able to come about it so naturally like that. And first off, do you have a copy of the book with you today by any chance?
This is the first one. Yeah.
Aha. Yes, there it is. Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. And what I wanted to point out is that I noticed when I was looking at the cover, it's kind of
Mhm.
like a fabric too. Like you intentionally made it look like that. Is that right?
This was unintentional, but awesome at the same time. My best friend uh, came into painting very late in life. She didn't
Ah,
start painting until she was in her 60s. And so when I did the first book, she says, I really want to paint your cover. So I said, well, of course. And so this background that looks like fabric was the canvas that she painted it on. And
oh,
so I had hired somebody from Fiverr to format the cover and to design the cover. And when I got it back and we saw that it looked like fabric, it was a bonus. It's like, that's so cool. It was unintentional, but it's perfect.
yeah, that's so
Yeah.
fun. I thought you were kind of going for like stitching on like a pair of jeans or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it just worked
Cool.
out.
I
Um,
love it. Well, yeah, so that's great. I always love to also shine a light on the covers too during these podcasts because we don't talk enough about how covers play a big impact in the book too. It's
yeah,
really
for sure.
as we were just talking about it, my mouse landed on the image and I could actually see. Is your friend's name Kit?
Yes.
Who That's so funny because it just happened to zoom in the little corner of your book. It's her signature too. So that's really cute.
Yes, it has. It is.
So yeah, really awesome. But diving more into the content itself, what's funny is in the messages before this podcast, you told me specifically that you are a quote tightwad, and so you tried to write the book all on your own from the beginning to end, but you ended up, hiring some editors to work on it too. So I'm wondering if you'd like to walk us through that process, the writing process of trying to do it on your own, what you learned, how did that all work out for you?
So, years and years and years ago, I've been writing forever. And when I was in my 20s, I wrote like 4 gigantic novels, you know, and I was trying to go the traditional route. And I had an agent for a while, and I had some good reads with people like Warner Brothers, and I just never got. In 10 years, all I accumulated was a big box of rejection letters. So I had really put away the writing for a while. And then I had this magical moment where I was doing some volunteer work with my 10-year-old daughter, and I was inspired by her journey with this volunteer work. It was at an equestrian therapy center. And so I'm like, I need to write about it. I mean, when you're a writer, you have to write. It comes out in some form. And so I wrote a magazine article, and it sold to the first person I sent it to. And then she bought a second article. And so it just took me back to that moment, like you said in the beginning, where I was told a long time ago, write what you know. And in my 20s, and I'm writing these fantastical, drama novels. I'm like, oh, I know all about life. I'm married. I have kids. I know all about, emotions and relationships and whatever. And when it came down to it, when I finally wrote about something that I really did know something about that related to the person I was sending it to, it sold. So yeah, so it was a big full circle moment. When I got around to doing the Fabric Wars, by then I was in my 50s. And I just really didn't want to spend or invest that amount of time again into the traditional route. It's tiring. Not only that, but the process has changed since when I was in my 20s. When I was in my 20s, you had this big, thick Bible of a book that listed all of the publishers and agents and editors. And, you know, you needed to buy that book annually to keep up to date on what was new, who was in, who was out. And you wrote letters the old fashioned way. You know, my first early query letters were done on a manual typewriter. You know, I was broke. It was all I had. Then I had a hand-me-down computer. But so anyway, I have a friend, a childhood friend that is a very accomplished young adult writer. Her first book was Girl in Pieces, which has done extremely well. And so I had messaged her and I said, you know, I'm so confused. Everything that I look at on the computer, I don't know how to publish this book. I can't tell who is a vanity press, who's a traditional press. You know, in my 20s, you didn't self-publish work. You didn't go the vanity route. And if you did, you were kind of frowned upon a little bit as somebody, you know, well, that person, she's the only one that believes in her work. You know, she can't sell it, so she's going to pay somebody else to do it for her. So it was really frowned upon in my 20s. So it was hard to come back now and have my friend, who is this successful author with Random House, tell me if I had to do it again, I would do it myself through Amazon. And I was like, really? And so I was like, huh, okay. So yeah, I got into the process and I started looking into formatting. And for the first book, Kindle Create had a formatting program that you could format it in their program. It was relatively easy. The downside to it was that it made it only readable by Amazon. So if I wanted to like upload it to Ingram Spark, they couldn't read the file. Okay. But I was okay with it at the time because it was the easy button, you know. But even with that, there were times that I wanted to throw my computer across the room because I just wasn't grasping it. I wasn't getting it. And I'd be freaking out and melting down. My husband would be like, okay, just put it away for a little while, come back to it. And it's like, but it's finished. It took me a year to write it. I just want to publish it. That's all I want to do. You know, writers want to write. They don't want to format. So when it came time for the cover, I had the artwork, but I didn't have a clue how to format a cover. And my sister told me about Fiverr, and I found somebody for $75 that did my cover. And that was like a no-brainer. That was easy, you know?
It really resonates with authors out there, especially these days when self-publishing is so big too. It's a
Yeah.
learning. I can see how it's you definitely learned the process. And in the messages that you sent to me later on in the journey, you actually were eventually picked up by Hollywood, a TV production, same person who actually helped with the Goosebumps series. Do you want to walk us through that a little bit? Because it's almost like a rags to riches type tale here, isn't it?
It was insane. I mean, the riches are far away. But I'm still in the rag stage, I feel like. But no, so
Antique rags.
exactly. So you know, when you're an indie author, the marketing is 100% on your shoulders. And I am learning that even going the traditional route, a large part of the marketing is still on the author's shoulders. You know, my friend is constantly creating videos and content and pushing, even though she's got a number one bestseller. It's been 6 or 7 years now, but she's still pushing, you know, hitting the pavement. It's kind of unfortunate because I go back to writers want to write. That's what I want to do. I just want to write. I don't want to do the rest, but that means I have to pay somebody to do the rest, you know, and most writers don't get rich writing. So you know, it's kind of like this, what do I do? So I was looking for free or cheap marketing ideas. And obviously, since so many people on Etsy had said, you really need to write a book, I felt like I already had my first customers. So, you know, I got on my computer and I wrote this paragraph about, you know, hey, thanks to you guys telling me to write a book, I finally have the book, you know, here it is. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it here. I'll sign it, you know, whatever, just the basics. And then I would write something in hand. I appreciate you, be well, whatever. And so every time I had a purchase either on Etsy or on eBay, I'd stuff one of those in my package. So 6 weeks after I published the first book, I get a message on Etsy saying, you know, my name is Yvonne Bernard, and I am a TV producer in California. How do you feel about reality TV? And so my first reaction was like, how do you know me? Because something I learned when I first became an indie author, is how quickly you get targeted. And I had so many phone calls, and I still get them to this day, from companies that say, we want to take you to the next international book fair. We want to, represent you. And basically what it is it's the old fashioned vanity house looking for you to hire them for their services, So anyway, I was constantly combating these phone calls and these solicitations. So I didn't know who she was, what she wanted, where she heard of me. I was like, did you even read the book? And she's like, well, not yet, but it sounds fascinating. And she said, your story just is really resonating with me. And so I was like, okay. And so I happened to look her up first on the internet. And of course, she's legitimate. Her biggest and primary client is R.L. Stine with the Goosebumps series. She's been with him since the 90s. My kids grew up on those books, This was a new endeavor for her, but she's a 60-something-year-old woman. I'm a 50-something-year-old woman. We're both in business. And so she just kind of felt like she connected with me, So yeah, I tracked her through my Etsy, and I found out that she was one of my customers, and she bought a $3 piece of scrap fabric of all things and got one of my notes. And I'm thinking to myself, I spent 10 years hammering out these long personal letters to editors and agents and, getting rejection after rejection. And I send her a note that I literally cut from a piece of paper and signed something on it, stuffed it in a package and out the door. It was strange.
Right. Yeah. Some things that sometimes just it works out that way, right? Fate just kind of falls into your lap, or in this case, in the package that you got delivered. So,
yeah, I asked me in my 20s if I thought I would have been writing a book about fabric. I would have, what? I always thought my roots were in fiction, but in the end, it's still storytelling.
right, right. But this also isn't your only book. You actually have a whole bunch, a whole series coming out, and one of them most recently was this year. Is that correct?
I published the second one, Fabric Wars and More. Unfortunately, I had to hire a new cover designer because my lady in Italy isn't on Fiverr anymore. And they did the best they could to make it look like the first one, but I didn't get that fabric texture like it did the first one. So I was kind of bummed. But anyway, the second book came out, I guess probably about 2 months ago, and at the same time, I was also kind of sort of working on this one too.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, the Arlo Campus series. Yeah, can you shine a little light on that for us? You also shared some really cool pictures of the bus itself with me. So yeah,
Yeah. Oh, the real bus. Yes.
yeah.
Well, my friend painted this too. She illustrated all the pictures in the book. And, she always told me that she really wanted to illustrate a children's book. And, my mom and dad had always been kind of pushing me, to write a children's book. But, we have, like you said, we have the real live bus, and we have that bus because we have 8 grandchildren, and we have a farm with hobby animals, chickens, ducks, horses. We have a huge pond with fish and pontoon boats with water slides. And the kids come for camp every year for a week. And the bus is how we get around. So yeah, so my mom always said, you really need to write the camp stories. So there's going to be a series. We're getting ready to start on the second one, but we literally just dropped this one. We have our first, we have 3 bookings in one weekend coming up in August. But the books, yes, they're going to talk about something that happened at camp. It's going to be a relatable experience to our grandkids. Oh, I remember when that happened, but it's going to focus a little bit deeper than that. I'm really passionate about supporting kids' emotional wellness. And I think that society puts a lot of pressure on kids about how they feel or how they should feel, or, it's tough being a kid sometimes. And this world's kind of topsy-turvy these days. There's been a lot of changes in the last decade, as far as identities and whatnot. So, Arlo's a bus. It's plain and simple. It's not a he, it's not a she, it's a bus, for crying out loud. Don't try to make it something. It is what it is. And so when the child reads the book, the child can then look at Arlo and identify with Arlo how they want to identify with Arlo. So the message of the first book, it's going to end with the message of I am loved. And we're actually making those little silicone wristbands, to go with each book, where it'll say Arlo on the bus, and then on the inside of the wristband is the little hidden message, I am loved. And then the next book will have a different hidden message, I am brave, I am special, I am whatever. But yeah, so this story just takes us through this. This is just the introduction. It talks about how we got the bus. It's pretty close to the true story. Found him on a dusty old car lot. It's about fixing Arlo up. It's about Arlo, going through all the different emotions, scared, lonely, and at the end, of course, loved.
I love that. It's beautiful, and it perfectly represents what you and your family have been doing also, just hopping in the bus and, enjoying life together. And I think it's really incredible. So yeah, everybody listening today, please be sure to check out not only her books on fabrics, but also about the Arlo Campus series, because it's definitely something to be learned from. So that being said, where can everybody connect with you and find these books and get in touch and stay up to date with the rest of the series?
Okay, so you can find I'm fairly active on Instagram. I try to do videos as much as I can. Instagram is under my shop name on Etsy, which is Dot Oddity, Doddity. I just literally did a video on the bus with the book. So that one's there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook author page. Of course, you can go to my Etsy shop and message me anytime. You can get signed copies of any of the books on Etsy. I don't have Arlo on Etsy just yet. I just ordered my author copies literally today. But you can get signed copies of the Fabric Wars there. And of course, you can get any of them on Amazon.
Okay, well, perfect. You heard it here, everybody. Amazon and all those other links, we're going to put them right in the description box of this podcast today. So you can go ahead and click right over and get connected and get in touch. So now, as we're beginning to wrap up our show here, I'm wondering what tips might you have for the writers listening today? What is something that you wish you knew when you first got started? What can we leave them with as pieces of wisdom?
Honestly, back in my 20s, I think that if I knew that one day I would finally get there, that I don't know. I'd like to say that I would have not had those periods where I quit writing. Those periods of feeling defeated and giving up. But there were also periods of survivalship for me. And I'm sure other people go through that. I went through a divorce when I was 40, and I was in a position where I had to make money. And so, that's how it started. But I say it all the time, writers have to write. And if you keep writing in everything that you do, eventually something's going to come from it. I believe in that, and the kids' books are as much for everybody else as they are for our grandkids. It's, I always believe it's what you leave behind. So I always think about that when I'm writing too. This is something I am leaving behind. And what do I want to represent?
Absolutely. That's something I think about too. A lot of people write for expanding their brand or, they just want to tell a fun story, but that's a whole nother aspect to it. And probably the most heavy one, what you're leaving behind, your legacy. Because at the end of the
Mhm.
day, these books are going to be here long after we are. So it's a
That's
beautiful,
the hope. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, clearly. And, when you think about it, you never know who's going to pick it up, what impact it's going to have on them. And there you go. There's that butterfly effect. So really beautiful.
Right.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
and quite honestly, real quick, the books,
Yeah.
I mean, fabric to a lot of people is like foreign land. Um, but the books are about so much more than fabric. And I just want to point that out. There's a lot of my journey in the books. There's a lot of my story that gets woven in. I get squirreled a lot in my storytelling. I'll be talking about one thing and it'll make me think of another. So then I have to talk about that and then come back to it. So yes, it's about fabric in some regard, but it's also it's about a person's journey, and yes, it's about the acquisitions and the competition, but it's also about the people that I've met. And it's kind of like a diary in ways.
I love that. Would you like to give an example for us? It sounds like it's something, you're super passionate about and that we should all know that. What's the one example of something we could look forward to once we dive deeper into it?
Well, let's see. Now there is one of your questions you were going to ask me, and I know I talk too much. I always talk too much, but one of the questions you were going to ask me was about my most meaningful finds. Okay. So I had gone to this one estate. It's called Homespun Proud. It is in the first book. And this was a woman who was there for the selling of her estate. And a lot of times I target estates where the family has passed on and the family is liquidating what is left. And it's a completely different buying experience, buying from the living than it is buying from the dead. The dead don't care what you pay for their precious belongings, but the living, when they're there, you have to face them, and you have to face them with whatever you paid for whatever they had that was special to them at some point. And that's hard. And so she had a lot of fabric to sell. She had buckets and buckets and buckets of fabric. And she had a lot of homespun fabric, which is like a checked fabric. Think of like primitive checked Christmas fabric anyway. So the fabric smelled very, very badly. She lived in a very modest modular home on a beautiful piece of property. And she and her husband were retiring and moving to Florida. So they'd raised their family. They were selling everything that was dear and near to their hearts. People were coming, looking, and driving away because everything they had was simple. And her modular home had the fabric was musty. She didn't have a good place to store it. She had a lot of fabric, but not a good place to store it. So it was musty. And she was a smoker. So you had must and you had smoke. And she knew that the fabric had an odor problem because then she took fabric softener sheets and layered it in between the fabric. So the fabric was really, really, really strong. But, all of our houses smell like something, I mean, I have dogs. Non-dog people probably walk into my house and be like, wow, I can smell dog. So we're not really in a position to judge why somebody's fabric smells the way that it does. But all the women that came for the fabric were standing in clusters talking about, oh, it smells, out loud. And and the woman who owned it was just loitering about, just hoping that she could sell her things and retire and move on. And she had these clusters of handmade things that weren't bringing any money. The auctioneers were throwing it all in piles because nobody was bidding and saying, somebody give me $2. And she's witnessing all of this, So when her fabric came up on the block, now I developed a product to clean fabric, to take odors out of fabric and textiles a long time ago, because this isn't my first rodeo with this. So I've got a product called the Grammy Whammy that removes odors from textiles in the dryer. Okay. So I knew that I could take care of the fabric. But I also knew that if nobody was going to bid on it, I literally could walk out of there with spending $2 for this gigantic hamper full of fabric times the dozen that were on that trailer. But she's standing there and watching. How do you do that? How do you do that to a person when nobody wants any of her other stuff either? So yeah, I was the only bidder, but I gave good bids. I gave solid bids. Maybe they were only $25 to $50 a bucket. But I knew that I could have had it for $2. And I was still going to make money. I had to make sure I made money. I couldn't give her like retail on it. But yeah, it's just, there's such a humanness in the people that I meet. And sometimes you have to take a step back from the business aspect of it and look at it for what it is and be like, what, there's people behind all this, so that was, you had asked me about my best fabric acquisition. I wouldn't say it was my best, but it was kind of one of my most memorable.
As I was listening, I just felt like this little knot in my heart. I felt so bad for that woman, like you gotta feel guilty. I can only imagine like her face just listening to these other people bicker, kind of like a high school drama or something. Like it just seems,
Yeah.
you know. So that's really heartwarming that you did that. So I can only imagine the many other stories that are in that book about all the other fabric too. I mean, even the ones behind you, I'm sure have a story behind them.
Yeah, these are part of the Black Hole series in book 2. It's all
Okay.
mid-century draperies and yeah.
Well,
But
awesome. Well, there you go. So yeah, everybody, there you go. You have incredible stories woven into all of Kira's books. You see the evidence right there behind her, so go ahead, check out the links we're going to have in the description box today. And Kira, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I really coming on. I'm loving everything I'm hearing. So it's really cool stuff. Thank you so much.
no, thank you for having me. I
Of
appreciate it.
course. Yeah, and again, to our listeners who want to follow Kira's adventures, you can find her books, Fabric Wars and Fabric Wars and more on Amazon, and the links in the description box. And don't forget about the Bus series also. And Who knows? Maybe one day we'll see Kira's story on reality TV thanks
Oh
to
my
that.
gosh.
So we'll see. We'll see. We'll stay on the lookout, everyone. All the more reasons to keep in touch. And until next time, this is the Authors on Mission podcast, reminding you that your expertise isn't something you have, it's something you hunt for, fight for, and ultimately something worth sharing with the world. So keep writing, keep hunting, and keep turning your obsessions into opportunities. We'll see you next time, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.